So first, I just want to thank you for changing your meeting from your usual Monday evening to Wednesday. As she said, I was born and raised in Orillia, so I'm not historically connected to the Bradford area, but I have been looking after teeth in Bradford for the last 20 years. So, yeah, I'm looking after the Bradford smiles. Yeah. And as she was saying, my mom, who is 93 years of age, is one of Canada's very few surviving British home children. And she didn't say a whisper to us until she was about 86 years of age, which was a little bit of a shock to us because we always assumed that we belonged to the Elder family and that she was born in Fair Valley, Ontario. And that turned out to not be true. Okay, so how many here know about the British home children? So quite a few. And how many have a direct connection in their family? So just a couple do, eh? Yeah, so the British home children, who they were about 100 to 118,000 children that were brought from the UK to Canada. And they were brought over between 1863 and 1949. And it's interesting because, we talked a bit about the slavery. And actually in Niagara-on-the-Lake, there was a revolt against slavery. One of these slaves had been brought up from the United States, and I'm pretty sure it's the same one that you were talking about, and had escaped. And there was a big to-do going on down there where the old Niagara-on-the-Lake jail used to be. That building would become a receiving home for the British home children, which is really interesting. So there was over 50 organizations that were bringing home children into Canada. Bernardo's would be the one that most people would know, most familiar with, but there was Foyers and there was Fagan Homes and Annie McPherson. There we go. Previous. There we go. So the girls were brought mainly into Peterborough, Ontario. And they just put up a monument up in Peterborough. I think it went up in 2011. And there's all the names of the girls that came through that receiving home are on that monument up there. And that's just under 9,000 girls that came through. And those girls would have been brought down and they would have been placed in Orillia and Barrie and Bradford and all around in these areas here. And that's my mom. And that's her at one of my nephew's weddings in Ottawa. And the interesting thing about my mom is not only did we find out that she was a British home child, I also found out that her dad was a British home child. And in fact, when I go through my family tree, I have 22 home children in my family tree. Yeah, and something, I always thought, like most people did, that the home children were orphans. I mean, I actually read a book when I was 13 in my mom's basement. It was written by a Bernardo girl by the name of Cecilia Joette. And in it, she didn't really talk too much about a family, and I always believed, like everybody else did, that they were orphans and that they were street children, and they called them gutter snipes, and all kinds of lovely descriptions. And when I looked into my mom's family history, I found out that she wasn't an orphan. In fact, she had 2 surviving parents. And she wasn't an unwanted child. I mean, where my mother came from is from a family that split up. And she was born in 1922 in Lingdon, Herefordshire. And her father had abandoned the family shortly before she was born. So my grandmother, as women were in those days, uneducated, and they didn't have jobs and not able to support the children, and she had 6 children. She ended up putting them into one of the workhouses. And is anybody here familiar with the workhouses in the UK? Yeah, very poor, desperate living conditions. And as an infant, my mom was lucky that she even survived. They took them out of the workhouse in 1924 and sent them to Canada. And my mom arrived on June 27th, and that was her second birthday. And, you know, on her second birthday, she was taken from her family, and she was taken from her mom and put into foster care and eventually adopted. Now, my mom would be considered one of the better stories when you get into the stories of the British home children, because most of them were brought here not to be adopted. They were brought here to be put on farms. They were brought here to be indentured servants and domestics. There was never any intention to return these children to their homes or to their families. And where these children came from was in today's society, they would be like our welfare children. In today's society, we have social systems in place, and we have mother's allowance, and we have welfare, and we have those things that when families, you know, when things happen in the families, we have some support systems there. In the UK, they didn't. And it was easier for them to take these children and to ship them out of the country. And they kept it up until 1972. They officially stopped bringing them into Canada in 1939, but they continued to migrate them out of the UK to Australia, Rhodesia, New Zealand, and they didn't stop until 1972. And it's interesting because when you go into that history, like I'm going to put on like a short video to show you some of the history of the migration programs, because it's just such a convoluted kind of subject that I couldn't possibly convey to you what I think people need to know about the British home children by just simply talking. So when I went back into my mom's history, I wanted to know how it was possible that, you know, a mother who wanted her children and who loved her children could lose them. And I wanted to know, you know, if that happened to my mom, you know, was there other children out there that were like her? And it's interesting because I just did an interview with the Packet and Times, and she asked me the question about, you know, where does this fire, where does this passion come from that makes you want to, I suppose, right the wrong. And, you know, in my life, I was married. I was married by the time I was 18. By the time I was 22, I had 2 children. By the time I was 28, I had another child that came into the picture. And I found myself in an abusive relationship that I needed to get out of. And my husband ended up leaving the family, and he left me on my own with these 3 kids. Now, I had started my education in dental, but I certainly wasn't finished. I had taken time off so that I could look after these children. I had to go on welfare. I had to go to social services. I had to go to the food bank. And, you know, to tell me that my grandmother, who was essentially in the same position that I was, that she should have deserved to have lost her children because of that, was like telling me that because I had a bad relationship and because I became a single mom, that I shouldn't have my children, that I should be punished by having my children taken away from me, and that those children should be sent to a different country and put to work. Like, what was that all about? And, you know, if you think that these children all came from poverty and they all came from the streets, when you look at the span of almost a century of doing this in the UK, poverty and children in the streets wasn't the real issue there. So you kind of wonder what it was. So I'm going to just flick on this little film, and then, you know, we'll talk after that.